Israel is lamenting before God. She is devastated because of her current condition. In this lesson entitled A Plea for Restoration, we're going to see what petitions she put on the table or the floor for God to answer. There are notes for this lesson. I'll leave a link in the description below or in the comment section. I'll leave a link above my head. Click that link, get your notes and your Sunday school books. For the International Sunday School lesson is now in session. Join me. Let's go. And welcome to another edition of the Sunday School lesson as taught by Pastor Rodney Jones, pastor of the New Nation Anointed Ministries, Church of God in Christ. We're located 1700 West 87th Street in the city of Chicago. 60620 is our mailing address. Welcome to you new subscribers and thank you for subscribing to this channel. If you would like to be notified each week as we upload our lessons, make sure you click that subscribe button and that bell notification beside it. Make sure that you click the word all so that YouTube will notify you each week through your email. Bing! Brother Jones just uploaded another lesson. Yes, it's a very late hour and we're going to go right into our lesson. I'm not sure if I will be able to live stream this coming Sunday. I will be flying out tonight to Phoenix, Arizona. I will be there the 23rd, the 24th, and the 25th. Those of you who want to scoop me up and let's go eat and let's talk about this Sunday school lesson or the Bible, whatever questions you have, reach me by my email. That's rodneyjonessundayschool@gmail.com. rodneyjonessundayschool@gmail.com. Then I will give you my number where you could reach me and let's talk about it. I will be available. I will be in Phoenix, Arizona just for these 3 days. Friday, Saturday, I fly back out Sunday night, come back to Chicago. We're in Lamentations, the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 22. And our topic for discussion is a plea for restoration. A plea for restoration. We're April the 25th, 2011. Let's get into this very long lesson. Remember, O Lord, what has come upon us. Consider and behold our reproach. So number one, Israel made a covenant with the Lord to be his people and to obey him. That would be Exodus the 19th chapter through the 20th chapter. He told them that he was a jealous God and that they were not to have any other gods before him. They agreed to the terms of the covenant that they would not serve other gods. He warned them what would take place if they were to serve other gods. He told them that they would be taken into captivity and a whole lot of other things that would take place to them if they broke the covenant. Israel broke the covenant with God and they went into idolatry, which is the worshiping of other gods or the idol gods, which he told them do not. He told them that he was a jealous God. They were taken into captivity on many occasions, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They would cry out to God. He would deliver them. They would be rescued. They would be living back in the land for a period of time. Then they would repeat it all over again. In today's lesson, the writer speaks or prays or makes a plea from the viewpoint of those that are left, those that have been left in the land. The others were taken in exile. he speaks of the present condition of the people of the land. Point number 4 is the people, they cry out unto the Lord for him to see what they are experiencing. To talk about the conditions of the land and the people. They are forced into hard labor, which is verses 5. They were going through oppression, which is verses 8. There was a famine in the land, which is verses 9. And sin was committed against the maidens and the princes. That's verse 11 and verse 12. And the young men were also in hardships, verse 13 and verses 14. So the first plea on the floor is for the Lord to consider what's going on. They or he asks the Lord. Now, from time you hear me say they or he, because we believe that it is Jeremiah who wrote the book of Lamentations, which he's possibly crying out as the people. So he asked the Lord to do 3 things as it relates to the people. So remember, to consider, and to behold. When you look at the word remember, it means, or remember, they said, I should say, oh Lord, what is come upon us? And the word remember means to recall or even to think about. They're asking God not to just remember, but to act upon what he sees. Because Israel has already gone through so much, even up until this very moment. They have lost so much, yet it's because of their sin. They would not be in this situation had they not breached contract with God. And so they says for him to remember, to recall, to think about. And after you remember this, they said to consider and to behold the reproach. You look at the word consider, it is a verb meaning to look, to watch, or to regard. It has the sense of looking somewhat intensely in a focused way at something. It means to gaze. To consider and to behold means to see with the eye. Its basic denotation is to see with the eye, the physical eye. God, open up your eye and literally see. Gaze upon the people and see what is going on. And you can clearly see that we are a reproach, which means shame or scorn or a disgrace. They mourn for God to watch, to regard, and to gaze at their present condition, because they are a reproach. They are a shame. They are a disgrace to everybody that will see them. And they have become a laughing stock of their enemies. It says to him, remember what has come upon us, consider and behold our reproach. Verse 2, they said, our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens. Now, in this lesson, this is what we call Hebrew parallelism. That's to take 2 phrases and to place them beside one another. And in many cases, they really mean the same way, but it's just a different form or a different way of saying it. So this lesson has that the word would be our inheritance and our houses. Well, technically, that's the same thing, because that land is their inheritance. So is that house. And that land is also their house, but it is also their inheritance, if you understand what I'm saying. So they say our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens, because the word stranger is also an alien. An alien is an individual who does not belong here. An alien is a stranger. A stranger is a person who does not belong there. They are aliens. So he's really saying the same thing. So they lament over their inheritance, which is turned to strangers. And the word inheritance is a word meaning their possession or their property. This word implied property that was given by means of a will or as a heritage, because God promised the land to Israel or to Abraham and his seed. That's Genesis 17. And God gave them this land that flowed with milk and honey. That will be Exodus 3 and 8. Not only did he give it to them, but he promised it to Abraham and to his seed. he sent Moses to Egypt to pull Israel out so that they can receive this promised land, Exodus 3 and 8. And he said if they were obedient, they would be able to eat the good of the land, Isaiah 1 and 19. And God knocked down the walls of Jericho so that they can possess this land. That would be Joshua in the first chapter. Now, however, if they did not obey him, then they would receive the curses of the land, Deuteronomy 28, 15 through 30. That's key and that's very important. And according to Jeremiah 25, 4 and 7, God will send his prophets to warn them on many occasions that they were walking ungodly and unruly, yet they paid them no attention. They refused to hear the prophets, so God sent them into captivity. That's Jeremiah 25. So their inheritance is now turned to strangers, those who are not children of Israel. They said our houses are turned to aliens. Aliens is someone not part of the family. They are a stranger or a foreigner. And because Israel breached covenant with God, their enemies took their houses. Because God is the ultimate owner of the promised land, and he has a right to give it to whomsoever. Plus, he's the one that established the rules and the regulations, the commandments. But they refuse to abide by them. Therefore, they are in the condition that they're in. If they didn't hearken to his voice, they would receive the curses. That's Deuteronomy 28 and 15. And God said that they would build houses and not live in them. Deuteronomy 28 and 30, which says, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof, simply because they refused to do what he told them to do. Verse number 3 and 4 says, we are orphans and fatherless. Our mothers are as widows. We have drunken our water for money. Our wood is sold unto us. We are orphans. So the fathers could have been taken into captivity and they could have been killed, because usually what happens is the fathers are the strength of the community. The fathers were the strength of the houses. The father was the strength of the country and of the nation. And what the enemy would do is destroy the fathers. When you destroy the fathers, you destroy the strength and the backbone of the community, of the house and of the family structure. And usually they would take the fathers, the strength and the men, back to their country into exile, and they would leave whatever is left to die, is what they would do. They said that we are orphans and fatherless, because the orphans are children who had no fathers or parental support group in Israel. They are orphans and mentions fatherless, which also really means orphans. Their mothers are as widows. King James says are as widows, which means they don't have any husbands. And it could be that they are as widows because their husbands are alive, but they were taken into captivity. That's how I'm kind of reading the King James. It could also mean that they do not have a support system, and therefore they are called orphans as well. Israel was told by God to care for the orphans, and that's interesting. That's Exodus 22, verses 22 to 24. Yet the people who took them captive and brought them into slavery in their own land are not subject to, nor will they abide by the laws of God, because God required them to take care of the orphans. Exodus the 22nd chapter. And so Israel have become orphans in their own land given to them by God because of sin. So instead of enjoying their own water, they now have to pay to drink their water. They have to pay for the usage of their own wood to strangers in their own land. This is their land, which will be flowing with milk and honey. It's now turned over to strangers, and God has allowed this to take place because of idolatry. Do not tell me what God will not allow to happen or to take place because of sin. Verse 5, our necks are under persecution. We labor and have no rest. He mentions the hard labor that they are forced into. Israel were in the land given to them by God, but now they are in the land given to them by God in hard labor. God brought them out of hard labor from the Egyptians to the land that would be flowing with milk and honey. And yet they're now in their own land, which is flowing with milk and honey. And they are taken captive as slaves and entered into hard labor. They were given rest on the Sabbath day, according to Exodus 28 through 11, because here it says we labor and have no rest. They can't even follow the laws of God in the city flowing with milk and honey, because now they've gone back into slavery. Their necks are under persecution. They have been into slavery, and they labor hard, and there is no rest. They cannot take not even a Sabbath rest. They are subject to those who are over them. They say our necks are under persecution, or the pursuers are upon our necks like a yoke. They had to labor, but were not given any rest in their own land. Verse 6 says, we have given the hand to the Egyptians and to the Assyrians to be satisfied with bread. When you look at the term hand, the word hand really means authority. But what they're now doing, they had to literally give their hand, because Israel was in a bad shape, and they called for help from their enemies. They were in slavery for some 400 years in Egypt by the Egyptians, and God delivered them. Later, they went back into sin, and God caused the Assyrian nation to take them. And according to history, the Assyrians put hooks in their noses and literally led them into exile and pulled them as slaves. And so they now had to give their hand as a pledge of fidelity and submission, apparently, just to eat. So the people of God living in the land flowing with milk and honey, and you're going to hear me say this often, is now begging just so that they can be satisfied. And the word satisfied means to be filled, or it means to be full. Verses 7, our fathers have sinned and are not. Look at the word not, which means they don't exist. They're gone. They're dead. They sin and they are not. And we have borne their iniquities. When you look at the word father, it means ancestors as well. Their ancestors or their fathers, they said, were guilty ones that caused this particular problem. And that is true, because the word fathers mean ancestors or patron of a class. But the problem is, Israel was judged as a nation, and Israel knew the plan of God for them, and Israel knew what God's covenant. They knew the terms of his covenant, and God told them what would happen. Now, if you tell me that if I do this, it's going to affect my children as well as my great grandchildren, and I do it, well, whose fault really is it? And it's not that God did it, but their obedience is what brought this affliction and this punishment upon them. They sinned against God, and the word sin means to miss the mark, and they did this through disobedience. Many of them have died because they said, our fathers have sinned and they are not, which means they are dead. They are not alive, or they are not with us, and we have borne their iniquity. Now, this is the remnant that's talking. The word borne is a verb meaning to bear a load or to carry, to endure, even to suffer. And iniquities is evil, guilt, or punishment. Our fathers committed the sin, but we are suffering off of their guilt. We're carrying their load. We're carrying their punishment that they did. Remember, God judges them as a nation. I'm so glad that God does not judge me based on the sins of my father. He does not judge my children based on the sins of me. He does not judge the church based on the sins of the pastor, and he will not judge the pastor based on the sins of the church. God does not do that. Now, every man is found guilty, and every man has to give an account to God himself. Point number 5 is God said he would visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the children, and that would be Deuteronomy the 5th chapter, the 9th verse. So they knew very well what could happen. Verses 8 and 9. Servants have ruled over us. There is none that doth deliver us out of their hand. We got our bread, and some of y'all's Bibles will say we got, G-A-D, G-A-T. We got our bread with the peril of our lives because of the sword of the wilderness. So these servants, notice what it says, servants have ruled over us, and not masters, not nobles, and not leaders, not rulers, not kings, not lords, but servants have ruled over us. These servants were the ones probably left by the king in the land once he took everybody else. He probably left his own servants there to do whatever they want to do. They are not the noblemen of the palace, but they are slaves. They are servants themselves. These slaves of the king were left in charge over the children of Israel, and they ruled over them. There were none left in Israel to fight, none left to deliver, and none was left there to bring them out. There was no nobles, there was no guards, there was no securities, there was no fathers. They are fatherless, they are orphans, they are as widows, because the strength was taken from the community, and now they are left vulnerable, and they are crying out to God. He said, we got our bread with the peril of our lives. And the word peril means serious and immediate danger. Apparently, food was scarce and very dangerous for them to find or even to hunt for. They had to get their food by the peril or by risking their lives. They had to go out and to scout for food, if that's the word that I want. These swords could be people hiding to attack them that would be looking for food. He said, because of the sword of the wilderness, which possibly mean that they could be attacked by the sword in the wilderness. And so they will risk their lives just to go out to get something to eat. Remind you now, this is the land that's flowing with milk and honey. This land is devastated. Verse 10, not only are they having a problem with the food, but look at what they said. Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. And so he paints a picture of them taking the wood burner and taking the tree or wood and putting it in there. And there would be a darkness or a soot from the wood. He says, but our skin is as black as that oven. The famine would be so bad and the famine would be so great, and possibly from the scorching of the sun as well, with the lack of food, the lack of water, the lack of resources, that it caused their skin to even turn black, and they looked like that they were in a famine, which is interesting because once again, this is the land that will be flowing with milk and honey. Verses 11 through 13. Here's where it gets really hurtful because of what the enemy does to the women and the children that were left in the land. Verse 11, they ravished the women in Zion and the maids in the cities of Judah. Now, technically, the Hebrew parallelism would be Zion and Judah. They would almost mean the same thing. Women and maids technically are the same, but they are two different breeds of women. And I'll tell you, and forgive me for using the word breeds. You understand, two different categories of women. Whew. Oh, wow. I was about to get them emails. What you mean? They ravished the women in Zion and the maids in the cities of Judah. Princes are hanged up by their hand. The faces of elders were not honored. They took the young men to grind, and the children fell under the wood. The situation is now getting worse for the children of Israel. The enemy is now moving against and violating the people. It's not enough to burn the city. It's not enough to take captive their men and the strength of the community. It's not enough to take their food, their resources, their sources, their water, and their cattle. But now they have to move against the people of the land to do devastating acts and acts of immorality performed against them. Not only was there a famine in the land, I should say, but the families were in trouble. Since the men of the city were taken, the strength of the city was removed. And I need to say that this is where we are now. Every time they lock up and every time they shoot and kill one of our men, they shoot and kill or they lock up the strength of our homes, the strength of our city, the strength of our community, and the strength of our culture, the strength of our church. The backbone is the men. Don't let nobody tell you that that's not the backbone. That's how God created it. I don't care what your auntie told you this morning. So the strength of the community was now gone. The enemy moved against each category of people. The women in Zion, the maids in the cities of Judah, the princes were hanged upon their hand. The faces of the elders were not honored. They took the young men to grind, and the children fell under the wood. They ravished the women in Zion, the maids that were in the cities of Judah. And you look at the word ravish, it's a verb indicating to be afflicted, to be oppressed, to be humbled. And the word maids is it's a feminine noun meaning virgin. And sometimes the word maid is used as a young woman. I believe here it may be possibly used as a virgin. So the men of the city have been taken captive. There was no protection of the city at this moment. The land is vulnerable to whosoever will. The women were left without protection, regardless of the age, and they apparently would rape those women in Zion, which I believe is the word used for ravish. Some of your different translations will use the word rape. They would rape those women in Zion. And the virgins or the young girls, they did that in Judah. They didn't care. And that was a culture, that was a custom of some of the in army. What they would do is after they take the men, after they burn the city and take all the goods, it's every man for himself. Then they would rape these young girls and they would leave them. Careless is what was in their hearts and in their minds. And so they took advantage of the women of all ages and locations. They ravished the women of Zion, which would be Jerusalem. And since the women were left vulnerable, they could not defend themselves. These servants most likely raped the women in Zion or in Jerusalem. And they possibly did the same thing to the virgins that would be in Judah, because, and you'll see that in the rest of that in the notes. I'm going to keep moving. Verse 14 through 16. The elders have ceased from the gate, the young men from their music. The joy of our heart is ceased. Our dance is turned into mourning. The crown is fallen from our head. Woe unto us, my dog is barking, that we have sinned. The normal sound and activities were absent from Jerusalem. The elders who normally sat at the gate to hear matters or to discuss things, the elders at the entrance of the gate would serve as a protection of the city. They would hear and try some cases. They would handle the business. They would be as a security. There would be men of wisdom. Whatever took place in that city, those men knew about it. They were the governing forces. They were the security guard. They were the strength of the community. And they are no longer at the gate The young men with their music, it represents the sound of joy, the sound of youth. The young men will not even be playing the instrument, because remember, the young men will be going into hard labor. So the sound of music turned to the sound of mourning. The sound of joy changed to the sound of sorrow. There is no more joy in their hearts because of the great affliction. There is no dancing in the street, but there is mourning. The sound of happiness and praise has ceased, and there is no sound. There is a sound, I should say, of weeping. The city flowing with milk and honey is starving for bread and water. The crown is fallen from our head, he says. We lost our honor. We lost our crown. The crown represented the glory and the majesty that belonged to Jerusalem. The crown represented the power and the authority of the one wearing it. It was an honor to be called children of Israel. The people knew of this honor and this people from all over. They were on top of the mountain and on top of the world, and the world envied them. But they lost their crown, they lost their honor, they lost their splendor, they lost their prestige. This could also mean that their literal king was either taken captive or killed as well. And so they says, woe unto us that we have sinned. They went from our fathers have sinned now to making the confession that we have sinned as well. Verses 17 and 18. For this our heart is faint. For these things our eyes are dim. Because of the mountain of Zion, which is desolate, the foxes walk upon it. Now, due to the condition of Mount Zion, which we call the church, because it is known that the church is built on Mount Zion. That's why they always say I'm going up to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was built up as well. And it said that their hearts were faint. And the word faint means to be sick. Their eyes are dim and they could barely see any form of relief. And the word dim is the word meaning to be dark, to grow dim, to be black, to hide, or to be obscure. Because of the tears that will be flowing from their eyes, because of the devastation of the land, because of what took place. And really they're saying because of Mount Zion, that's the heart of the place, in which was the heart of God and the heart of the people, because it was desolate. And the word desolate means to be destroyed. The place where they would meet God, the place that they will worship God, the place that they will offer up unto God, the place that they will hear from God is now destroyed. And their eyes are dim or weak. Their eyes have gotten to where they are unable to see any type of light at the end of the tunnel. And it's so bad that even the foxes begin to walk on it. And these are foxes that don't just come into a city. They have to feel comfortable. They are so comfortable because the land is waste. The land is desolate and destroyed, that the foxes can now walk through the city without any problem. Verses 19 through 22. Thou, O Lord, remainest forever, thy throne from generation to generation. Wherefore dost thou forget us forever, and forsake us so long time? Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old, for thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us. Thou, he says, O Lord, remainest forever. Forever, your word is settled. You remain forever. Now look at that word forever. The word forever means for a very long time. His throne remains forever. His throne remains forever from generation to generation. Each generation would experience God. From the time that God brought Israel out, he was God. When he brought them through the wilderness, he is God. When he brought them through the Red Sea, he is God. When he brought them through Jericho or the Jordan River, he is God. When he brought them through Jericho, when he tore down the walls, when they possessed the land, he is still God. He still remains as being God because he remains for a long time. And even his throne goes from generation to generation. From Moses all the way to Jeremiah, his throne still remains forever. Then he says, but wherefore dost thou forget us forever? How is it that you're forgetting us and forsaking us for a long time? Now they put this thing on the floor, but she needs to understand that God didn't forsake you. You are on your hour of punishment. This is your time of affliction. You're where you are because you moved against God, because you were disobedient. You wouldn't hear the prophets that he sent time after time, and God pleaded and he begged them, come, let us reason. Let us talk about this. But they refused to. Now they are in trouble and they feel as if God has forgotten them or God has forsaken them for such a long time. Then this request, they're now asking for God to turn them because they can't trust themselves to turn unto God because they're still in trouble because every time they look around, they've been turning away from God. Now they're asking God himself to turn us unto you. Oh my, you don't want God to put bits in your mouth and a bridle on your tongue and pull on you and holler yow or gee or whatever they call that in Mississippi or in Dodge City. Bonanza. So he says, turn us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Now they want him to renew the days as old. They want God to renew the days when they were flowing with milk and honey, to renew the days when they were worshiping God, when they were fellowshipping with God, when God was speaking to them or speaking through them. They want those days when the old men would be sitting at the gate, when the young men would be playing the music. Those days when the maids would be able to walk the streets of Judah and nothing happened to them. Those days when the sound of music is throughout the land. Those are the days they want God to renew, to bring back, or to restore. Yet those same days are the days that God was pleading with them. The same days are the days when they turn their backs on God. They're in a trouble, they're in a situation, and there's nothing that they can do until that time of suffering and sorrow has ceased based on the timing of God. But thou hast utterly rejected us, is what they said. Thou art very wroth against us. Yes, he is wroth, and his wrath is here. Only you've got to accept and experience the wrath of God until the timing has been fulfilled. Very interesting, very good lesson, a plea for restoration. And while we're in this pandemic, we need to get down on them and ask God to forgive us. Now, don't think that this pandemic just happened to take place. That's all I'm going to say on that. But this is a time for us to reap or to receive, or it's a time for us to seek after God while we're on this pandemic. If you're liking these lessons, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. If you don't like it, go ahead and give us a thumbs up as well. Share this lesson with your loved ones and share it with your enemies. It's good news. Share this lesson with your friends, your loved ones, and your enemies. Leave me some comments and tell me what is it that you like about this lesson. Maybe something that you saw a different way. Maybe there's a question you want asked or you want an answer to, or maybe you have a suggestion for this as I prepare to leave and fly out in the morning to be in Arizona. Make sure you reach out to me, Rodney Jones Sunday School @gmail.com, and let me know, hey, I'm going to swing by. Now, Saturday, I will be at my daughter's graduation, but I'll be there Friday and Sunday. I want somebody to say, hey, let's do some Sunday school talk, whatever the case may be. Y'all know how to reach with me. Remember, I'm not sure if I'll see you on Sunday morning. I'm going to try. Teaching the Word of God in the spirit of excellence. A child saved is a soul saved, plus a life. Amen.